Following the previous three-part series on the truth behind the Unification Church clerics, where we went in depth, exposing the unprincipled and corrupt actions taken against Adamic authority, by individuals hell-bent on maintaining power within a church institution, we now bring you a new series on the truth of the sanctuary church. In this three-part series, we will delve into 1. Hyung Jin Sean Moon and Kook Jin Moon's fraudulent rise to power within the unification movement. 2. The theological frameworks used by Sean, Kook Jin, clerics, and Mrs. Hak Ja Han, to justify the political machinations of their regime. And 3. The subversive and despicable acts perpetrated by them against Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hyun Jin Preston Moon's Adamic authority, in their unholy quest to hijack key movement entities. The current video is the first of the three parts, and it uncovers the process of the controversial rise to power of Sean and Kook Jin within the unification movement. We explore how Sean and Kook Jin's ascent was meticulously orchestrated through deceit, manipulation, and the calculated efforts of church clerics with the support of Mrs. Han. We also dive into the false narratives and propaganda that inflated Sean's reputation, examine Kook Jin's overblown business accolades, and reveal the underhanded tactics used to install the brothers to give them control over key movement entities. This video exposes the traitorous acts these two committed against Adamic authority, and their deviation from Reverend Moon's vision, ultimately leading to a structural and ideological degeneration that gave cause to the schism within the movement, but also set the stage for their creation of the controversial and abominable sanctuary church. Sean's rise to power was a concerted effort that required the collusion of the clerics on many fronts, especially in the area of communication, public relations, and image management over several years. Things like truth, integrity, and facts stood in the way of their disinformation campaigns. The clerics sought to convince the membership that Sean and Kook Jin were worthy of adoration and worship. The propaganda regarding Sean was filled with false accolades. Unification Church clerics actively promoted Sean as a supposedly amazing religious leader. The cabal put Sean on a pedestal, even falsifying his academic record, making him out to be greater than he was. Sean's ministry began at the Unification Church in Mapo in the mid-2000s. Sean and clerics ordered the closure of the nearby small churches, so that the members of those churches would have no choice but to go to Sean's Mapo church. Thus, Sean and clerics made it appear as though his church was popular and growing rapidly in numbers. They celebrated this fake track record, and used it to promote Sean to become the pastor of the headquarters church in Yongsan, Korea. There, they repeated the same process of closing nearby churches in Seoul to consolidate membership in one church, giving the appearance that membership numbers were growing under Sean. This undermined Reverend Moon's direction to have many small local family churches. Consolidating the smaller churches into one big church, to give the false impression of growth, shows the bureaucratic mindset of the church clerics centered on the accumulation of power in one institution, as opposed to Reverend Moon's idea of Hoondok family churches, which emphasizes the decentralized nature of the movement, that empowers every blessed family to be a true witness to God's providential work within their communities. The fake achievement in numbers was also promoted to the media. It is known that news articles can be bought and paid for in Korea. And the fluff pieces and propaganda articles that the cabal put out regarding Sean and Kook Jin made it obvious that they did. In August 2008, Midas magazine published that the Mapo church rapidly grew from 70 to 600 members. When Sean became pastor of the church headquarters, he started with 150 members. Now, his church has more than 3,000 members. About a year later, in October 2009, Newsmaker published an article that said, Sean started his ministry with only 70 members, but within 2 years, church membership numbers have grown to more than 10,000. The cabal made a conscious and concerted push for organized deception. They devoted resources, people, and funds, coupled with talking points, for maximum effect. Such a feat would have been impossible to pull off without the intermediary clerics, but also the support of Mrs. Han. The clerics presented Kook Jin as a business genius. In an interview with Korean media, Kook Jin claimed that his firearm company had a yearly profit of close to $80 million. An investigative journalist researched the matter and found out that, according to the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, this claim of profits had been inflated by 10 to 12 times. One of the reasons Kook Jin's achievements were exaggerated was to present him as an outstanding businessman, because the clerics wanted to use him to take control of all major assets, including the Yeouido Park 1 project. But it was all lies and exaggeration, which the cabal never admitted nor retracted. The cabal colluded to put Sean, Kook Jin, and clerics themselves in control of the legal boards of major providential organizations, including HSA UWC USA, UPF, and the Tongil Foundation. They recognized that with legal control they could do whatever they wanted, without having to ask permission from Reverend Moon. Because the clerics are not people of sincere faith, they have no qualms of using members of the true family as their sword and shield, to break away from the unification movement's tradition of having organizations align with the unique spiritual authority of the Adamic figure. Both Adamic figures, Reverend Moon and Dr. Moon, were steadfast in their conviction to advance God's providence in the end of church era, by dismantling the Unification Church organization, something that the clerics had no intention to follow. The movement's tradition had always been that the many independent organizations that Reverend Moon founded followed the direction and guidance of the Adamic figure. The entities gave deference to the providential goals and priorities set forth by the Adamic figure. But, by installing the siblings as heads of major organizations, the cabal could cut away from historical precedent by moving outside the bounds of Adamic authority. Thus, they were able to undermine the providential nature of those entities. This was part of the clerics' devious plan, to position the Family Federation as a Catholic Church-style institution that they control, which they claimed, has ultimate authority over all the movement's assets, organizations, and personnel. Sean was crucial to their plan to advance this errant model. This new hierarchical model was purely the cleric's self-serving concoction, that was never the historic precedent, nor Reverend Moon's intention for the movement. As was mentioned previously, the providential mandate of the age was Reverend Moon's call to dismantle the church in the end of the church era. A hierarchical structure with the Family Federation at the very top, as a supreme church entity, could not have been further from what Reverend Moon envisioned. But it was the structure the clerics desired. And the siblings were foolish enough to allow themselves to be used to advance that agenda. They willingly acquiesced to the clerics' plan to promote the Unification Church, believing that they would be the head of that church. But that process ended up destroying the true family, which is the actual central messianic vehicle of the movement. The clerics alone would never have been able to do this. Only members of the true family could have done it. Kook Jin took over financial institutions, including the Tongil Foundation, and the Unification Church of Japan, thereby controlling the purse strings or funds of the movement. The cabal installed Sean as international president of the Family Federation, allowing Sean and clerics to monopolize their control over members, donation dollars, as well as the official channels of communication, which included the World Mission Headquarters that sends out official memoranda all over the world. In this way, Sean and Kook Jin had control over the religious and the business aspects of the movement, the two areas that the clerics recognized as the basis of power and authority within an institutional church. This left Dr. Moon only with control over the social or political elements, which, in truth, are central for the actual providential work of bringing about world peace, but which the cabal disregarded as being secondary. In everything they did, the cabal undermined Adamic authority, while bolstering organizational control. And the cabal had no intention to follow Adamic authority, because now they had taken legal control over entities. Both Dr. Moon and Reverend Moon allowed the siblings to take on responsibility over parts of the movement, because they never imagined that members of the true family could initiate and lead such a devious betrayal of their own family, and of God's providence. By now, it should be painfully obvious that the siblings' actions advanced the cleric's agenda by fundamentally undermining the providential nature of the true family. These siblings were used by the clerics as tools to betray their own family in support of a satanic church. To this day, Sean claims to be Reverend Moon's successor. His rise to power and his holding on to false notions of successorship mainly stem from three instances that he and the Sanctuary Church continue to promote. 1. The April 2008 inauguration of Sean as International President of Family Federation. 2. The January 2009 God's Coronation Ceremonies. And 3. The June 2010 Shameful Bedroom Video Declaration. It was the cabal that promoted and forced the concept of Sean as successor to the membership through those contrived instances. Although only a small group of his followers recognizes Sean as successor today, at the time, the clerics and Mrs. Hahn were the force behind this unholy legitimization of Sean's usurping of the successor position. Creating a semblance of legitimacy in Sean's successorship was critical to the cabal, because they understood how difficult it would be to dislodge Dr. Moon as successor. Creating an entire new and fake successor narrative out of thin air required the cabal to use Reverend Moon's name and image to give the entire pretense an air of legitimacy. Supported by the clerics' subversive and false propaganda, the siblings propped themselves up while destroying Reverend Moon's marriage, family, as well as the natural order in the true family, and, ultimately, the movement that he founded. The clerics exploited their intermediary positions, and the toxic culture of absolute obedience they had cultivated among members, to have them believe anything they said, as if it were coming from Reverend Moon. It was the clerics who pushed this lie of three sons as successors, and created a false perception that Reverend Moon's lineal succession was in question. The illegitimate inaugurations of the siblings were intentionally done without Dr. Moon's presence, and in total disregard of Reverend Moon's directives. Their inaugurations to various positions were orchestrated with Mrs. Hahn's backing and the clerics' maneuvering to give the instances an air of legitimacy by claiming they were done at true parents' direction. Especially, the cabal was ignoring and bypassing Reverend Moon's directive, and his understanding that all personnel serve at the direction of the Adamic figures. As Reverend Moon instructed, any new appointments in the age of the children, or age of the second generation, took place within the auspices of, and at the direction of, the fourth Adam. But the siblings showed no intention of being under the realm of the fourth Adam. This is despite the fact that during Sean's inauguration, as International President of the Family Federation in 2008, Reverend Moon gave a speech and prayer, where he repeated 16 times that Sean was to work within the auspices of the realm of the fourth Adam. In Reverend Moon's eyes, Dr. Moon's siblings were merely taking on symbolic, managerial, administrative roles within the confines of existing organizations. These clerical-type positions had always worked at the behest of, and within the auspices of the Adamic figure, who has ultimate spiritual authority over the movement. Former presidents of Family Federation, Reverend Chung Huan Kwok, and son Joe Huang, both held the position of international president of that entity at different times, yet both recognized and submitted to Dr. Moon's Adamic authority. Reverend Moon's expectation was that Sean would align to Adamic authority and follow Dr. Moon. However, Sean and Kukjin resented their brother's special providential status, and aimed to subvert Dr. Moon's position, by using organizational and legal positions, to have him subordinate to their will. To this day, Sean looks at his inaugural ceremony as a moment when he was somehow legitimized by Reverend Moon. When in truth, it is the moment that Reverend Moon requested Sean to work under the direction of his elder brother, Dr. Moon, to advance God's providence. Reverend Moon never asked or expected Sean to usurp or to claim successorship status through his inauguration. Yet another instance Sean clings onto, as a way to legitimize himself as supposed successor, is the 2009 coronation of God ceremony. In the beginning of 2009, Reverend Moon planned a series of coronation ceremonies of God's kingship. And his intention was clearly stated in the title of the event itself, to honor God's kingship and his sovereignty. By this time, clerics were no longer following Reverend Moon's instructions, but followed Mrs. Han. Originally, Reverend Moon intended Dr. Moon to lead the event, as he had done in past instances. But Mrs. Han and the cabal moved heaven and earth, to have Sean participate in the ceremony instead. With control over the ceremony and its preparation, the cabal turned it into something that it was never meant to be. Sean's coronation as a new heir. This deception and treachery completely deceived the members, creating the impression that there was a change in Reverend Moon's succession plan, and that now Sean was a new heir. At a 2010 Family Federation event, Peter Kim was one among many of the clerics, who promoted God's coronation ceremony, as the moment that Sean was crowned successor, sparing no accolades. Because Dr. Moon was firmly established as fourth Adam, and legitimate successor, he never needed to pad his position with fake acknowledgments by the clerics, through the distortion of providentially important moments. Dr. Moon never used the various coronation ceremonies he participated in, as a way to promote himself as the successor. But the cabal had no scruples. Years later, only after Sean sued the clerics and his mother, cleric Changshik Yang, publicly stated that the coronation ceremony had nothing to do with Sean's successorship. Yang himself was one of the individuals who supported this facade of Sean as a successor, and fervently spread the notion. Showing their hypocrisy and lack of legitimacy, other Family Federation representatives would later also deny that the coronation ceremony had any connection to Sean's successorship. The truth of their evil acts only began to come out, when the members of the cabal started to fight amongst each other. Everything they did was a lie all along. The official position of the Family Federation today is that the coronation ceremony had nothing to do with Sean as successor, regardless of the fact that they claimed it had everything to do with his successorship at the time. One final instance that Sean repeatedly brings up to support his claim as a successor is the June 2010 bedroom video, in which Sean's wife filmed Reverend Moon signing the so-called Heretic and Destroyer document. Sean's shameless use of this video is especially despicable, because it clearly shows a tragic instance of elder abuse. Mrs. Han and Sean were united, in their common goal of undermining Dr. Moon. Together, they goad, coax, provoke, prod, and badger a fragile and confused Reverend Moon, to write a document for them. In the video, Reverend Moon can be seen reluctantly going along, being used for their scheme. A most heinous example of elder abuse. Acting in concert with clerics, Mrs. Han and Sean were trying to get a declaration from Reverend Moon, to use as propaganda, to support their lie that it was true parents' direction, that Sean was heir, that Dr. Moon was a heretic and a destroyer, and to advance the institutionalization of the Unification Church. Later, Mrs. Han disavowed Sean as ever being the successor, discarding Sean, who was no longer useful to her after Reverend Moon passed away. Hypocritically, but not surprisingly, Sean later changed his tune, and said that the heretic and destroyer mentioned in the declaration was not in reference to his brother, Dr. Moon, but that it referred to Mrs. Han. Both Mrs. Han and Sean's words and actions only confirmed that everything they did was totally fake, all a lie, without any merit to begin with. Towards the end of his life, Reverend Moon came to understand how he was used by the cabal. He made statements that Sean and Kook Jin were not the heirs, and that he did not put them into the positions they held. Although the cabal wore Reverend Moon on their sleeves when politically expedient, they ignored his most important directions during his most vulnerable final years, and his words never reached the membership. Members should ask themselves, if Reverend Moon did not give them such positions, then, who among the true parents did? It was Mrs. Hahn. Utilizing the confusion they created with the false theological notions of the divinity and co-equal status of true parents, as well as the false framework of 3 sons as successors, the cabal advanced the claim of Sean as successor, despite Reverend Moon's requests to bring back and to restore Dr. Moon to his rightful position. As we have seen, everything the cabal did to prop up Sean and Kook Jin in 2008, 2009, and 2010, was based on treacherous lies and manipulated staged events. When the 2 brothers were eventually kicked out by the clerics and Mrs. Hahn, Sean and Kook Jin used the same fake formula to form a new narrative for their sanctuary church, because they were no longer colluding with Mrs. Hahn and the clerics. Sean now sees Mrs. Hahn as his main enemy, revealing his opportunistic and manipulative nature. The truth does not matter to him. There is absolutely no appreciation whatsoever for his mother, Mrs. Hahn, who moved heaven and earth, to fraudulently elevate him to whatever authority and power he enjoyed, when he ran the movement as the fake heir. Whatever perceived legitimacy he had at one point, was all due to his mother. Yet, his vitriol and hatred toward his mother is palpable, and reveals his character. There is no honor, no dignity, but only his narcissistic self-centered ego. He crossed every sacred line that a member of a family should never cross. The movement that Reverend Moon founded, and that Dr. Moon led, was centered on true love, recognizing God as the source of truth, righteousness, and goodness. But to Sean and Kook Jin, none of that mattered. To them, all that mattered was what they could get away with, using propaganda. A model they have now adopted in their satanic sanctuary church. Their lack of moral character speaks volumes. Contrary to Reverend Moon's providential directive to dismantle the Unification Church and move beyond churches, Sean fully embraced and adopted a church platform to curry favor with clerics to create the perception that he and Kook Jin were new successors. The clerics pushed against Reverend Moon's end of the church-era mandate for years, delaying his dream of a worldwide providential movement to establish one family under God that transcends all religious, racial, and national barriers. Against this backdrop of resistance to Reverend Moon's directives, the only person who was advancing that providential goal was Dr. Moon, their biggest threat. On the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the founding of HSA-UWC, Reverend Moon explained, "I inaugurated the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification on July 31, 1996, in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. Some 4,000 people attended, including many heads of state and high-ranking world religious leaders. On that day, I officially announced the end of the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. With the inauguration of the Family Federation, the providential age in which families may receive salvation that transcends the boundaries of religion, nationality, and race has begun." Sean understood none of it. All he knew was that Reverend Moon and Dr. Moon were opposed to the idea of an institutional church, and that the Adamic figures were against the cleric's agenda. Rather than support his father and brother, Sean consciously chose to break away from Unification movement tradition, and politically supported the cleric's destruction of Reverend Moon's original mission, of moving beyond the framework of religious institutions. As international president of the Family Federation, Sean's understanding of the purpose for its founding was nearly non-existent. In a speech in 2009, he said,
"We have passed through the formation stage in the era of HSAUWC and the growth period in the era of the Family Federation, and we have now entered the era of the Unification Church. All religions must attend the true parents."
In a news interview in Korea, Sean said,
"The Unification Church no longer uses the name Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. We proudly use the name Unification Church instead."
On July 17, 2009, Sean issued an official Family Federation memo to notify members that the Family Federation would be changing its name to Unification Church. Some 13 years after it had been inaugurated, the Family Federation, which was born out of Reverend Moon's sincere and urgent need to start his original mission, and to fulfill his promise to God, was sent back to the wilderness age. Sean and clerics orchestrated the organizational name change of the Family Federation to Unification Church, under the guise that the true parents had approved and blessed said change. But, it clearly contradicted Reverend Moon's consistent message of going beyond the boundaries of churches and religion. The supposed transition to Unification Church was never mentioned or acknowledged by Reverend Moon. Its supposed providential significance was never explained by him, and there was no high-profile event, inviting thousands of leaders from various sectors of society, to commemorate the occasion, as he had done with the inaugurations of Family Federation and the Universal Peace Federation, under Dr. Moon's leadership. When he inaugurated the Family Federation, Reverend Moon hosted dignitaries in a prestigious event, and pulled all the stops to make it clear to the entire world that the age of the Unification Church had ended, and that a new era was dawning. In the case of UPF, Reverend Moon initiated a long inaugural tour, in which all true children went to almost every country over several months, announcing the occasion of the new entity's formation and its purpose. In the same way that the cabal illegitimately and surreptitiously hijacked various organizations and key leadership positions in them, when Dr. Moon was away, so also did the cabal usurp the Family Federation's core identity and its very mission. As if hijacking Family Federation and distorting its essence was not enough, the cabal went after the Universal Peace Federation as well. The cabal saw the Universal Peace Federation, or UPF, as a vehicle in the social area category, merely as an outreach arm that engaged in meaningless social and peace work. Sean and Kook Jin were ignorant of the importance of peace work, which is central to the universal goals of all major faith traditions. In Christianity, Jesus was referred to as the Prince of Peace, and taught loving one's enemies. The very word Islam means peace, stemming from its root word salam, and people greet one another by saying, "Peace be upon you." Buddhism and Hinduism teach the importance of reaching inner peace, as well as notions like ahimsa, or non-violence, to express compassion for all living beings. Peace is the objective of God's providence of restoration, and it is expressed in all religious traditions, and even mentioned in the names of most entities founded by Reverend Moon. Yet, in complete ignorance, Sean and Kook Jin looked down upon this area, and sought to defund and dismantle all the peace initiatives, which they did. From 2005 to 2006 and onwards, Reverend Moon initiated a world tour of rallies, as the inauguration of the ultimate providential vehicle he would establish, the Universal Peace Federation. In his inaugural address, Reverend Moon talks about the founding purpose of UPF. This is a message of peace, dedicated to the celebration of our establishing the kingdom of the Universal Peace Federation. This message is being declared, on the foundation of the complete victory, that has been achieved through the restoration and returning to heaven of the three things lost at the time of the fall. God's lineage, the realm of true love among siblings, and the right of ownership. World leaders, I have said that the model of true love, and true peace, is created within a true family. Thus, the kingdom of the Universal Peace Federation is ultimately the expansion of the original ideal family into a true, peaceful, ideal family that exists throughout heaven and earth. Serve humanity under the banner of the Universal Peace Federation, which, on this occasion of the first anniversary of its inauguration, is now taking on the role of an able-type United Nations on the global level. Consistent with his providential outlook, Reverend Moon said he was ready to serve humanity, and sacrifice the Unification Church for the sake of the world. At the time, UPF was the most significant providential vehicle that Reverend Moon founded for the purpose of bringing about a world of peace, his lifelong goal. But, because UPF was under Dr. Moon, the cabal went after it. After illegitimately removing Dr. Moon, and taking over UPF, Sean derailed UPF's focus by getting rid of peace initiatives, and making it into a sectarian entity, that benefits the false Unification Church that he now controlled. In his inaugural speech, Sean mentioned the Unification Church 15 times, steering an entity that had been built for the purpose of working with all faith communities to become a proselytizing arm for one church. The day after Sean's forced inauguration as chairman of UPF, on November 19, 2009, an upset Reverend Moon instructed to cancel Sean's UPF inauguration and to restore the previous leadership of Dr. Moon. But his instructions went unheeded, ignored, and struck from the record. As they had done with Family Federation, Sean and clerics changed the very nature of UPF so that it would not serve its founding providential purpose. Blessed family members went along with it, without questioning. This sequence of events is also an indictment of members, who blindly followed without understanding the purpose of the various organizational vehicles that were meant to serve the providential goals of the Adamic figures. Tragically, members never understood what it is they believed in. After Kook Jin was installed as chair of Tongil Foundation, Kook Jin and Sean promoted their unprincipled view that Abel should have had the capacity to kill or overpower Cain, and that Abel was only killed by his older brother Cain, because Abel was weak. This was their so-called strong Abel theory. Needless to say, this notion goes against the divine principle, and Reverend Moon's teachings of true love and natural subjugation, as the means of overcoming conflict and bringing someone back to God's side. In the history of restoration, Reverend Moon taught that Satan's side strikes first, and God's side takes the first blow. God's side naturally defends itself from satanic attacks, as one would in self-defense, but would not be the side to initiate violence. Reverend Moon said, "Whom must Abel love? Cain. Abel must love Cain. He must subjugate him naturally with love. He must stand in the position of loving him, by shedding blood and tears. He must give greater love than anyone else in the world. Otherwise, Cain will not submit to Abel, and thus, restoration cannot be carried out." Ignorant of their father's teachings, Sean and Kook Jin advanced the notion of God's side initiating aggression, in a complete reversal of the principle. Clearly, their understanding of a so-called strong Abel having the capacity to kill Cain first, reveals their utter ignorance of principle and of God's providence of restoration throughout history. They took this concept of strong Abel and used it to rationalize the use of violence and aggression, even killing others, by an Abel figure. This concept also formed the basis to justify attacking their older brother, Dr. Moon. The clerics, as well as members worldwide, accepted the glaringly contradictory and satanic strong Abel theory for years, without questioning. What's even worse, is that they used the providential vehicle of the Universal Peace Federation as the platform to spread their false theory on the use of aggression. Emphasizing peace and the character of a true Abel, Reverend Moon said the following at UPF's inaugural speech. "Why must we continue this insane barbarism, pouring countless dollars into wars that do not accomplish anything more than death? Now is the time, as the prophet Isaiah taught, to beat our swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. The only way to survive is to practice the peace philosophy of true love, true life and true lineage, taught by Reverend Moon." Similar concepts to strong Abel would later become the basis for their founding of the Sanctuary Church, as well as the reason for which weapons are featured prominently in their version of the marriage ceremony. Sean's period as international president of the Unification Church unveiled the political and opportunistic character of the clerics, as well as the general ignorance and complacency of the membership. Even though Sean would take the church in directions that contradicted Reverend Moon's lifelong work and teachings, thereby undermining Adamic authority and damaging the image of the movement, clerics and members went along with the charade. Apart from the disastrous providential deviation of changing the Family Federation into the Unification Church and the unprincipled strong Abel theory, Sean used the pulpit to stress that members are slaves and sinners foremost, rather than emphasizing their identity as sons and daughters of God. Another example of the falsity of everything during this period is Sean's use of vibrations to channel energy to true parents. Key clerics also copied Sean and went along with it while he was in power. Sean would put his hands in the air, close his eyes, and chant words as if he were a shaman. Members worldwide tuned in and followed such cultish behavior. After Sean was removed, the church stopped doing this type of vibration service. During Sean's period in power, like grifters on a mission, the church also shamelessly sold books, candles, lanterns, salt with expiration dates, and other objects, claiming to have spiritual power, or as tickets to heaven. This is profoundly unethical and revealing, as it exploits the members' spiritual needs for monetary gain. Similar to how the Catholic Church's indulgences in the past were criticized for turning salvation into a commercial transaction, such practices manipulate believers' hopes and fears, undermining the true essence of spiritual teaching and integrity. Sean and Kuk Jin Moon's rise to power within the unification movement was marked by a glaring absence of genuine qualifications and a fundamental misunderstanding of the movement's core principles. Despite lacking substantial accomplishments or spiritual depth, they were elevated to prominent positions through the deliberate and calculated efforts of church clerics and Mrs. Han. This calculated ascension, built on propaganda and deceit, saw Sean and Kuk Jin manipulating information and inflating supposed achievements to create a false image of competence and leadership capability. From the false claims about their achievements, to the strategic consolidation of church resources, and the distortion of Reverend Moon's teachings, their actions dramatically shifted the direction and ethos of the movement. Their control over key movement entities, gained through these unscrupulous tactics, severely diverged from the decentralized and spiritually driven vision laid out by Reverend Moon and faithfully upheld by Dr. Moon. In stark contrast to Sean and Kuk Jin's regime, Dr. Moon and Reverend Moon embodied the authentic spirit of stewardship, emphasizing true love, integrity, and a commitment to God's providence over calculated attempts at gaining control over institutional power. Reverend Moon's vision was clear in his desire to dismantle the Unification Church organization in favor of a worldwide movement centered on families and communities dedicated to achieving global peace. However, Sean and Kuk Jin's betrayal of this vision, through a hierarchical and bureaucratic takeover, not only fragmented the true family, but also diverted the movement from its divine mission. Their actions epitomize a stark deviation from the selfless and spiritual leadership exemplified by their father and elder brother, instead illustrating a regime driven by ambition and deception. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will delve into the theological frameworks that Sean and Kuk Jin developed with the clerics and Mrs. Han to justify and further entrench their grasp on power. Through these revelations, we aim to shed light on the true nature of their regime and the profound impact it has had on the legacy of the unification movement.